In the cave, and the adults, about 5 or 6 adults, had been killed, but the baby was alive and crying. So I took the baby out and went outside. I did not know what to do with the baby, but some South Korean women walked by, and I just gave them the baby. They did not speak English.
Yeah. They know what I mean. Yeah.
And I don't know what happened to the baby, and I've often wondered what could have happened to the baby.
Okay. Oops.
And I've often wondered what happened to my South Korean soldiers who were captured along with me.
Yeah.
I have no idea. This is my wife. We got married on June the 9th, 1949. Her name was Sybil, and Sybil was the first girl that I ever dated. She was 15 years old, and I was 16 years old.
Wait a second. So she's in 15? In 16?
Huh?
When you marry?
We got married in 1949, and we were married, husband and wife, for 68 years.
Wow.
Unfortunately, my wife Sybil died in 2017, and I miss her so much. This photo was made when I was released from prison camp. I flew to Columbia, South Carolina, and my wife wore a bright red dress. And before the plane landed, I could see her standing up in a crowd, waving her hands. And I got down, and she was the first person that I talked with after I got back, and I said, "Sybil, why did you wear the bright red dress?" She said, "I wanted to make sure that you saw me." And I thought there would be just 2 or 3 people at the airport, but she brought more than 100 people along with her, and I was shocked by the size of the crowd when I stepped off the airplane.
Question.
Yes.
Did you kiss her?
Yes, I gave her a big kiss. I did kiss her. And it was the first time I had kissed anybody in almost 4 years. But she was a sweet woman.
What's this?
Oh, me to tell you about it?
Yes, sir.
After the Incheon invasion, the North Korean army was in disarray, and I was sent with my platoon of about 50 men to go into the mountains north of Daejeon and look to see if I could find the North Korean army, because we did not know what happened to them. Well, I was walking up a footpath, going up single file. All my men were behind me because the path was too narrow. And I kept watching ahead of me, and all of a sudden I spotted 2 North Korean officers on the same path that I was on. I was going uphill, they were going downhill. I waited till they got about 40 yards from me, and I called out, I don't know if I used the correct word or not, but I said, "Chongji, stop." I yelled, "Chongji." But they responded by firing at me with 2 machine guns. I had a carbine, and we had a gunfight there on that path. They were coming down, I was going up, and you see the shoulder board, so that tells you who won the gunfight. I gave them a chance by yelling Changji, but rather than stopping, he immediately fired at me with a machine gun. And I had no alternative except to return the fire. This picture was made at POW camp number 2, located at Pincheon, North Korea. We spent the first winter, I spent the first winter in a shirt and a pair of pants, no jacket, and I had just one boot because I had been shot in the foot and I lost my other boot. But about September in 1951, we were issued by the Chinese Army these cotton-padded uniforms, and the next day after we were issued the new uniforms, they came out with the camera and they took pictures of us in the new uniforms. There was no mention, however, about the fact that we had spent the previous winter. I was actually barefooted and had a shirt and a pair of pants, and I almost froze to death. But they made the picture for propaganda purposes. I was stationed in Beppu, Japan, when the North Korean Army invaded South Korea. My unit was immediately placed on LST ships, landing ship tank, and we went from Beppu, Japan to Busan. We arrived in Busan on July the 5th, 1950.
So you are first one. You are first in Korea.
But
you are first United States military in Korea.
I was the first lieutenant. I was a lieutenant in Korea. I had a platoon of 50 men. We immediately moved northward, and we set up positions on the Kong River, north of Daejeon. And we got pushed back. We had to withdraw through Daejeon. We continued being pushed back, and they were trying to force us into the ocean. But we would set up a defensive position. We would get hit by the North Korean Army. We would have to withdraw and set up another position somewhere else. We would get hit, then we'd have to withdraw and set up another position. And that continued until the Incheon invasion. After the Incheon invasion, the North Korean Army fled northward and offered us no resistance at all. And we moved very rapidly through the southern part of North Korea, moving 20 or 30 miles each day. We passed through Pyongyang. Well, let me back up. Before we got to Pyongyang, we passed through a North Korean city named Anak.
Anak.
And as we approached Anak, I was walking. I was the very first man. With me and my sergeant, we were first. I heard gunfire, a lot of gunfire, a half mile away in Anak. And in a few minutes, 2 North Korean men dressed in white with their hands above their head, says, "Don't shoot. We have liberated the city for you." And they had a civil uprising. The non-communists overthrew the communist government in Anak when they realized we were just a half mile away. We went into town and they were opening a mass grave. They took out 30 or 40 bodies and laid them on the ground around the grave. We stayed there one night, and I might mention this, something very unusual happened in Anak. The North Korean non-communist government officials held a banquet that night for my company commander and me. It was a very unusual thing, but it was a banquet for us. We spent the night. We continued moving northward the next morning. The next morning I passed that same mass grave. This time they had North Korean civilians with their hands tied behind their backs. And as we got about 100 yards beyond the grave, I heard gunfire. I turned and looked, and they were shooting and killing these North Korean people who had their hands tied behind the back. We did not participate, but we continued our march northward. A year and a half later, after I was captured, after I was a POW, they had these political indoctrination sessions every day, 4 or 5 hours a day. One day they showed up with large photographs, 2 or 3 feet square, on easels of the mass grave and the bodies of the people who had been killed. The Chinese officer said, "This is proof positive of the atrocities committed by the United States Army in the North Korean city of Anak." He was lying. The atrocities were committed by North Koreans against North Koreans. The United States Army, and I was the first one in there, we never fired a shot.
I trust you.
But he went on and on, the atrocities committed by the United States Army. I finally stood, which was forbidden, but I stood, I shouted, "It is a damned lie. The atrocities were committed by North Koreans against North Koreans." The Chinese officer shouted, "How do you know?" I said, "I was there and I saw what happened." That was a mistake for me to say that. He called for the guards. They came and got me. They dragged me out of the POW camp about a half mile away to an isolated area surrounded by a rock wall. He said, "Take your clothes off." I took my clothes off. I was naked. He said, "Stand at attention." And so I stood at attention, naked, inside this small compound. After several hours, North Korean officers and Chinese officers in full military dress arrived. They went inside a building, leaving me outside, standing at attention, naked. They went inside and they held a trial for me. And apparently during this trial, they decided that I would be charged with being a war criminal for the atrocities committed in the North Korean city of Anak, even though we never fired a single shot in Anak. After several hours of them being inside conducting this trial, they told me to put my clothes on. They took me back into camp. They refused to tell me what had taken place inside when they had that trial. I did not know about the trial really until after the war ended, after the 30-day prisoner of war exchange ended. All the POWs in my compound were released. Everyone. I was by myself, alone. I found the English-speaking Chinese officer. I said, I thought the POW exchange was supposed to end today. They said, that's right, it's over. I said, what do you mean it's over? I'm still here. He said, you are not a POW. And that shocked me. I said, what am I if I am not a POW? He said, you are a war criminal. And that was terrifying. I never dreamed that they would charge me with being a war criminal. I said, what did I do to become a war criminal? He answered me with 2 words, remember Anak. And then I realized that they had charged me as being responsible for the atrocities, the people being killed in Anak and the mass grave in Anak, whereas we never fired a single shot. But anyway, he said, you will not be released. You are a war criminal. I spent a sleepless night by myself. Everybody else had been released. The next morning, the Chinese officer came. He gave the word to some Chinese soldiers. They grabbed me. They dragged me to a flatbed truck. They threw me on the truck. The Chinese officer got on the back of the truck with me. The guard got on the inside of the truck with the driver. They took me to an isolated area. And the Chinese officer said, get off the truck. And I got off the truck, and I thought I was going to be killed at that minute. But the Chinese officer pointed to a footpath about 12 or 15 inches wide. He says, do you see that path? I said, yes. He said, walk down that path. It is mined on both sides. If you step off the path, you'll be killed. I hesitated. He shouted, move. And that was the last word ever spoken to me by either a Chinese or North Korean officer. I started walking, and it was not much of a path. It was difficult to stay on, but I walked for about 2 hours, and then I realized that I was walking on a footpath crossing the demilitarized zone, which connected North Korea and South Korea. But after about 2 hours, I came across a United States Army ambulance, and I walked up to the ambulance. There was a major. He called out to me, "Are you Lieutenant Funchess?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Lieutenant, you don't realize how lucky you are to be here. They were holding you as a war criminal. We had war criminals also. Last night, both sides agreed to exchange war criminals." Then he said, "Get inside the ambulance. We'll close the doors and we'll go find something for you to eat." I believe it ended September 24th, and this was the following day, which would have been September 25th, 1953. And I was released alone, by myself. And fortunately, there was a United States Army ambulance waiting for me.
Just good. You're so lucky. Thank you for it.
Yes, sir. Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. You're almost your last one.
Sir,
You are last POW.
what?
You are almost the last POW, right? You are last one in POW.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. I was the last one in my compound. I saw no others. And but they did hold some of the high-ranking American officers. But when I was released, I stepped off the helicopter. I got on the ship. There was no place on the ship for me. So they put me in the room with those high-ranking United States Army officers, and they had been released before I was released. So as far as I know, I was last.